Okay, so the talk is called "Was Buddha Just a Nice Guy?" and this will become clearer as we go along with the talk. Basically, we're talking about three different ways of trying to understand the nature of consciousness. One way is the proper scientific way in the neurosciences, where consciousness is generated by the brain. And it comes about because it seems as though our consciousness is inside our head most of the time. But when you look inside the head, all you see are these sorts of things. You see the anatomy, the skeletal structure. You go inside trying to find the consciousness, and you don't really find it. So this is our challenge. Where's consciousness? The standard neurosciences are extremely effective, though, in showing that there are activity within the brain and regions within the brain that are associated with fairly subtle forms of subjectivity, including things like perceiving the intentions and the morality of others. So it's fairly clear that the neurosciences are on the right track, but it's still not telling us exactly where consciousness resides. So another approach is this. This is more of an Eastern philosophical approach, where activity in the brain is reflecting consciousness. And it comes about primarily through the contemplative practices. If you sit down long enough and meditate, you begin to perceive that the mind consists of many different layers and levels. And the traditions based on this suggest that consciousness is actually more fundamental than the brain. And it also gives rise to this sort of thing. That you have some kind of structure there that effectively presents in a subjective way little pictures to us, but who's looking at the pictures is the question. And that may be something that is actually residing outside the brain. This is a more fundamental form of consciousness. And then there's a third possibility, and it just represented in a symbolic way as this. And this, of course, is from the traditions showing the chakras and energy fields and used in energetic medicine and all that, where maybe there's a third or fourth or even fifth methods that tell us something about consciousness that science has yet to catch up with, but it's worth keeping in mind. So was Buddha just a nice guy? And ultimately, again, we need to understand the nature of consciousness in order to know this, because the picture is portraying Buddha surrounded by flame and levitating over his disciples. This is part of the stories of Buddha. And of course, we also have stories of Moses parting the Red Sea. Of course, this is the actor Charlton Heston parting the Red Sea. And you have stories of Jesus walking on water. In the modern secular world, these kinds of stories are, of course, taken with a grain of salt. So maybe when the Red Sea parted, it was just a fluke. Or maybe what Moses was saying with the tablets, that he was glad my name's not thou. And of course, this is very popular when people see the image of Jesus or Mother Mary or perhaps the Mona Lisa impressed on various substances. In this case, it's a picture of, to me it looks like the Mona Lisa on a grilled cheese sandwich. And in this case, the grilled cheese sandwich was considered a miracle because the image appeared. And the second miracle was that the grilled cheese sandwich is incorruptible, so it is said. In other words, this was taken 10 years ago and it hasn't decayed. So that must be miraculous. And as a result, a casino in Las Vegas bought this cheese sandwich, and now it's in display in Las Vegas. Oh, and by the way, if you want to see many pictures like this, there's a website called thingsthatlookLikeJesus.com. If you're too busy to meditate, you could always try the Buddha patch and achieve enlightenment while cleaning your toilet. also available in caps, gel, and suppository. And then my all-time favorite is this next one. If there is no God, how come the world fits so perfectly into a chicken? So that's how science and the secular world considers stories of the supernormal and the supernatural, but we still return to this question: was Buddha just a nice guy? Did his teachings last for a couple thousand years because he was nice? Or just considering not the title of the Buddha, but the man, Siddhartha, maybe he was the George Clooney of the day. He was a celebrity, he had a good tan, he knew how to work a crowd, he had a nice smile. That's a possibility. Or maybe there's something else going on. And so we're going to look at the something else. The something else is raised repeatedly by the Dalai Lama in his dialogues with scientists. This was a picture showing the 25th year of these dialogues, but they've actually been going on even longer. And it's given rise to things like contemplative neuroscience. And this has been actually a good advancement where a lot has been discovered about the nature of meditation, what it does to the brain and the mind, and giving rise to books like Power of the Brain. This is all very good stuff. But what the neurosciences have not answered, the Dalai Lama has asked this repeatedly: do supernormals' ability exist? Are they divine gifts or latent potentials? And given that Tibetan Buddhism and virtually every other religious tradition talks about special abilities, well, why aren't the neurosciences studying this? Well, the short answer is it's taboo. And one of the reasons is that our current evolutionary idea is that we evolved from monkeys, and then we became cavemen, and now we're modern man, and this appears to be the direction that we're moving. But there's another more positive evolutionary idea, and that comes out of the yogic tradition. And this is the evolution of man from simian, meaning ape-like, to sapiens, meaning man today, to the siddhis, the supermen. So this chart we're showing roughly 500 years from now, we'll all be able to hover, and 7,000 years later, we'll be able to fly. So we still have quite a ways to go. But that's somewhat more of a positive evolutionary trend. So I'm going to look at yoga a little more carefully. So yoga is a classical book of yoga. It's the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, written roughly 2,000 years ago, and it was the first written form of what up to that point had been purely an oral tradition, passed on from teacher to student. No one actually knows how long it was around before then. It may have been several thousand additional years before. And it's 4 little books, 196 short phrases or sutras. And the book is all about samadhi. Samadhi is a form of very deep meditation. You can think of it as a first stage of a mystical experience. And if you can achieve samadhi, and you practice something called sanyama, this is a combination of concentration, meditation, and deep absorption, and you sustain that along with an object of attention, then it is said, according to the Yoga Sutras, that you will develop certain superpowers. These are called siddhis. It's a Sanskrit term meaning perfection or attainment as a result of meditative practice. And so what are the siddhis? There are 3 categories of siddhis. There are mind-body siddhis. These include things like big things like levitation, gravitation, super strength, super speed, inedia, which means being able to live without eating or drinking, and super healing, being able to heal yourself very rapidly of any kind of illness. Clairvoyance, perception through space and time, from the most macro world to the most micro, and psychokinesis, which are dramatic forms of direct mind over matter. So these are said to be the outcomes of certain forms of advanced meditation. What's interesting is that these ideas, these same siddhis or powers, are found in all cultures. And yoga, they're called the siddhis. In Catholicism, they're known as the charisms. In Islam, they're called karamats. It's also, there are names of Judaism and Tibetan Buddhism, all shamanic traditions. And they all talk about the same thing. They talk about certain abilities. The difference between yoga and traditional religions is that in yoga, it is said that anybody can develop this with sufficient discipline. In most traditional religions, these are considered to be something like grace, like talent or a gift that you're given. But ultimately, they're all talking about the same kinds of phenomena. So what do we do with this from a scientific perspective? Most scientists don't look at these things because they're considered to be superstition and we don't want to shake the boat. But fortunately, there are always some scientists who are willing to rock the boat. And so over the years, the siddhis have been given names like telepathy, which is some kind of connection between the minds of people at a distance. Psychokinesis, or mind over matter, which is impressing your will or your intention onto the world. Clairvoyance, which is gaining information from the world. And precognition, in which you gain information from the world, but it's slipped in time. In this case, it's slipped in the future, but you could also have retrocognition and get information from the past. So these are simply labels that have been given to these kinds of experiences. So, whoops, I went backwards. That is precognition. So how do we explain these things? Well, from a scientific perspective, you simply listen to the stories that people have described over many years, and roughly half of them can be considered coincidence. And this is because people generally don't have a very good sense of the probability of events. So strange coincidences will happen. About 25% or a little bit less are confabulation. This means not that somebody made it up, which is fraud, but rather that they misremember what actually happened. And then another 20% or so is selective memory, and the interesting thing is the bit left over. The yellow shows something else going on, and this is always the case. Any collection of anecdotes, you can get mundane explanations for most of it, but not all. And that's where the science becomes interesting. So, in the Yoga Sutras, Sutra book number 3, Sutras 19 and 20, talks about knowledge of minds. And this is a technique that you can develop through meditation, where you gain the knowledge of other people's minds. We would call that telepathy. This has been studied in a laboratory, not in a yogic sense, but in a scientific experiment that works in the following way. So what you're looking at here, the lady who is having the ping pong balls pasted over her eyes, her name is Gail, she's a friend of mine. She's asked to keep her eyes open under the ping pong balls, so all she can see is pink everywhere. There's a red light shining in her face to make it even more obvious that with her eyes open, she can't see anything except pink. She's in a comfortable chair, and we'll also put headphones on her so she can only hear white noise. A person putting all this on her is my research assistant named Lena. So Gail is put into that state, it's called Ganzfeld state, for about 20 minutes, and meanwhile, a friend of hers is given 4 envelopes. Neither Gail or her friend know what's in the envelopes. We shuffle them up and randomly select one of the 4 pictures. So this is the example of this session where there are 4 pictures prepared in advance. One of these was selected. So, and Gail is going to have to select which one she thinks her friend is telepathically sending to her later, while in the Ganzfeld state. The reason she's in that state is because it very quickly becomes starved for input. Your brain starts thinking, I'm not seeing anything, I'm not hearing anything, and you begin to hallucinate. So the idea is to become very sensitive to subtle impressions, and maybe including the thoughts of Gail's friend who's at a distance looking at one of these pictures. So by chance, if you do this experiment and telepathy doesn't exist, then she would only get it right 1 in 4 times, or 25%. So this is what Gail actually said, and during this 20 minutes when she's in the Gonskald state, and one of the 4 pictures is being looked at by her friend. She says, something has a rough texture, tall, looking up high, like in an art gallery or in a museum. A Yosemite kind of image of a tall rock. Yosemite is a famous national park in California. Monolithic, images of Mount Rushmore, Half Dome, which is also in Yosemite Park, like a big stone. So if you were a judge in this experiment, you saw what Gail said, and you had to guess which one of the 4 pictures that her friend was sending, you probably, like many people, would select this image. And this, in fact, was the random image that her friend indeed was trying to send. So this is an example of one trial in this experiment. It takes roughly 90 minutes to do this experiment, between setting it up all the way to evaluating it at the end, and you get 1 data point. It's either a hit, in this case it's a hit, or it's a miss. So it's a very simple statistic that you end up with. Results as of a couple years ago, there were 122 experiments of this type, reported by 20 laboratories around the world, and 4,674 sessions, of which I just showed you 1. What you see here then, the dotted line is chance, 25%, and each little circle is the mean of the experiment, and the error bars you can see, 95% error bars. So some of the experiments didn't work, and some of them did. Some of the error bars include chance, and to be able to visualize this a little bit easier, we'll just show this in a cumulative way rather than each experiment separately. When you look at it cumulatively, this is what you get. And so you can see that the endpoint there ends at roughly 32%. And the error bars keep getting smaller and smaller because they have more and more data. When you evaluate this statistically, oh, and by the way, this has been repeatedly discussed in the peer-reviewed journals, primarily Psychological Bulletin, which is one of the higher impact academic psychology journals. So this is known to psychologists. The odds against chance, oops, let's go back. The odds against chance for being at 32% rather than chance 25% is 300 trillion quadrillion to 1. So we know absolutely that what we're getting in these experiments is reasonably consistent and is absolutely not chance. And now the question is, well, if it's not chance, then what is it? So we go through a list, and we consider other classical explanations. This is just a few of them. There's about 20 different things that it could possibly be. And by design, these experiments are designed to get rid of these as possible loopholes. So I don't have time to go into this in detail, but each one of them addressed and discussed over many years, about 40 years now. And the best design experiments, both subject fraud and experimenter fraud, are excluded by design. But up until recently, we weren't able to answer this question, which often comes up. Could a skeptic who does not believe in telepathy replicate this experiment? Unfortunately, now we can answer this because in 2005, there were 2 psychology professors who explicitly say in their article that they do not believe that this is real. But to their credit, they went ahead and did the experiment in the same way and said, after 8 studies, we have an overall statistically significant hit rate of 32%, which is what the previous 4 decades of studies keep showing. It's around a 32% rate. And by the way, with unselected subjects, these are not people who claim telepathy, but just are usually college sophomores who happen to be around. But since they really don't believe in telepathy, they also added that this was precariously close to demonstrating humans do have psychic powers, and so they decided they didn't believe it after all. And this of course, is a problem in science when if your belief trumps your data, including your own data, then we have a problem. In this case, they have a problem. So that is one form of a class of studies, all of which are looking at telepathy. There were roughly 4 different classes of studies looking at telepathy. And when you look at all of them, a strong statement can be made. From an empirical perspective, telepathy exists beyond a reasonable doubt. So what does all this have to do with Buddha? Well, for one thing, are you not thinking? But I'm not thinking. This is more like a Zen joke. What does this say about the other cities? Well, remember that I mentioned this city of knowledge of other minds, which is mentioned in the Yoga Sutras. But there are other cities that have been tested as well. This does not mean that we're all Supermen, but it does mean that we all have at least inherently certain, what we might think of as super abilities. So these are the ones that have been tested with high confidence in scientific experiments. There basically are 4 classes. Telepathy and many subclasses, very likely to exist. Clairvoyance, sometimes called remote viewing, also very likely to exist, as is precognition, as is psychokinesis at a low level, meaning microscopic level. The total number of peer-reviewed publications is, I estimate, somewhere between 500 and 1,000, and the total number of actual experiments is somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 actual experiments. They all have certain commonalities, and this first commonality is the reason why these things are considered scientifically controversial. All of them are independent of space and time. So up until the development of quantum mechanics, the notion that things could be connected through space-time was considered nonsense. But now with non-locality, we know that the physical world does support those kinds of phenomena, so it's no longer physically impossible. Another commonality is that all of these phenomena are better described as first sense rather than sixth sense. In other words, this is not an additional sense that we have. It seems to come prior to the ordinary senses. And we also know that these phenomena are strongly modulated by things like talent, experience, belief, emotion, empathy, motivation, openness, and some evidence that this is mediated by the right temporal lobe of the brain. You see this again and again, many, many studies. In general, the scientific response to the siddhis and to these kinds of psychic phenomena is good luck getting a peer review. Fortunately, because scientists tend to be persistent, the number of mainstream publications, or mainstream journals where these studies are being published is slowly increasing. And like many topics, it goes through fads and fashions, and we're on an uptick. There have been about 20 years where this has been quite a quiescent field. But many, many young people now, young scientists, are becoming interested in this because they're growing up knowing about quantum mechanics, knowing about the strange forms of connections, and they no longer see these phenomena as so strange. It's certainly not as strange as their professors have seen it. So it is becoming possible now to publish this in better and better journals. And just to give one example, the online journal series called Frontiers, we published an article on precognition research, which has been downloaded now over 50,000 times. And you compare that to typical journal articles, which you're lucky if they're downloaded 100 times. So there's a huge interest in these topics when they appear in journals with higher impact. And we're beginning to see that more and more. So that's a good sign. So the conclusions are this. First of all, science confirms that some of the siddhis, the traditional notions of special inherent abilities, they do exist. The second thing is that most of the siddhis have not been systematically studied. This is partially because in order to study them, you need people who are truly exceptional, and at least within the yogic tradition, there are strong prohibitions against demonstrating these kinds of effects. So the very people who can do these siddhis are not going to come into the laboratory. That's a problem. The third is that scientific explanations for these kinds of phenomena will require advancements in both the neurosciences and in physics. At this point, I think it's more that advancements in physics will be necessary, but we're beginning to see that already through quantum biology. Because we've already shown that quantum phenomena exist in biological systems. When it bubbles up into something like brains, then we have a much more plausible explanation for what's going on here. And I have been predicting for 20 years that we'll eventually find that something like quantum coherence is present in brains. And then the last thing is that progress in this area is slow, and every advancement is not just controversial, it's absurdly controversial. Progress is slow because funding, like as in any area of frontier science, is very limited. And advancements are always slow because controversy and science don't mix very well. So we'll go back. First of all, I'll do an advertisement for my book. This came out last year. This is, it goes into great gory detail both on the yogic traditions and lore and also on the scientific evidence for what I'm calling supernormal abilities. And I'm calling it supernormal rather than supernatural because I believe these actually are normal abilities, but they're a little bit better than normal, so they're supernormal. So was Buddha just a nice guy? Well, of course, talking here about the special abilities attributed to famous religious figures. And in this case, I would say that Buddha maybe was a nice guy. I think if you asked his wife and children when he initially left them in order to spend a couple of years in the forest, they probably didn't think he was a very nice guy. Later, after he became enlightened, maybe he became a little nicer. But more importantly, was he just a nice guy? The answer is no. He was more than just a nice guy, as are many, many other people, and not just religious figures. So here we are then, where science is struggling with these ancient ideas, trying to use modern methods and modern tools and techniques to study it and find out what's actually going on here. And so we're put in this strange position of consciousness, essentially, that is looking at itself. And we have the delightful recursive problem of consciousness trying to understand itself. So I'm going to end there, and maybe I have a few minutes to answer some